I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped through the arch of white roses. The applause was too loud. The smiles were too polished. The air itself felt staged, as if someone had sprayed artificial joy over the crowd and expected me to breathe it in. The garden behind the Whittaker estate had been transformed into a celebration ground. Strings of golden lights hung above the guests like frozen lightning. Round tables draped in ivory cloth surrounded a wooden platform where a small brass band played cheerful music. People laughed and clapped as I walked past them. Some recognized me, some pretended to. It did not matter. My eyes were fixed ahead. He was there, sitting in a dark mahogany wheelchair facing the sea of guests. My grandfather, or so everyone claimed. I stopped halfway to the stage. The distance between us could not have been more than 20 steps. Yet I felt as if I were observing him through thick glass. His posture was perfect, too perfect. His hands rested calmly on the armrests. His face was turned slightly toward the sun as if he were enjoying the warmth. The guests watched him with admiration. Some even wiped their tears. They believed they were witnessing a touching tribute to a respected elder. I was witnessing a crime in elegant wrapping. That man was not my grandfather. No one else seemed to notice. My mother stood beside the wheelchair with a radiant smile. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder like a devoted daughter. My uncle stood nearby holding a glass of champagne. His eyes were full of showy pride. My younger cousins gathered around taking photos. Everyone looked convinced. Everyone except me. I had not seen my grandfather in 3 years, not because I wanted distance. Life had pulled me away to places where letters arrived late and phone calls were rare. Yet my memories of him remained sharp. I remembered the texture of his voice, the way his laugh always erupted before he could finish a sentence, the scent of cedar and machine oil that clung to his clothes from long hours in his workshop. Most of all, I remembered his hands. He had lost the tip of his left index finger when he was a young carpenter. He used to tap that shortened finger against the table whenever he thought deeply. The man in the wheelchair had all 10 fingers perfectly intact. My breath turned cold. The band kept playing, a cheerful melody about love and time. I felt neither. I felt calculation. I felt betrayal wrapped in silk and confetti. Someone touched my arm. "Esther, you are finally here." My mother's voice was smooth with emotion. She leaned in and kissed my cheek. Her perfume smelled of white lilies. Elegant, familiar, comforting, yet suddenly suffocating. She turned me toward the crowd and raised her glass as if presenting a trophy. My daughter. She came all the way from Boston just to surprise her grandfather. The guests applauded again. I smiled mechanically. My eyes drifted back to the man in the wheelchair. He lifted his head and looked at me. His expression carried the perfect mix of warmth and frailty, a performance worthy of an award. "Grandpa," I whispered softly, only loud enough for myself to hear, "you were taller. Your shoulders were wider, your eyes were darker. You never blinked gently like that. You never sat that still." I walked closer. My legs moved on their own. My mind raced through every possibility. Had my grandfather recovered miraculously? Had someone replaced him for a temporary show? Had I finally lost my sanity? I stopped in front of him and knelt. I reached for his hand as any loving granddaughter would. His skin was dry, warm, real, yet unfamiliar. His palm was smooth. My grandfather's hands had always been rough like tree bark. He squeezed my fingers gently. Rehearsed gesture of affection. His eyes met mine. There was no recognition, only caution. Something inside me snapped quietly. I stood up and forced a smile so wide it hurt my cheeks. My mother whispered something to the guests and guided me toward a small podium where speeches were about to begin. The band softened. A hush fell over the garden. "Ladies and gentlemen," my mother began with a bright voice. "Thank you all for joining us to honor the incredible life of Samuel Whittaker, a man of strength, wisdom, and endless generosity." More applause. I stared at her. Her words flowed smoothly like practiced poetry. She spoke about his military service, his years as a carpenter, his community projects, his kindness, his legacy. She looked toward the man in the wheelchair. Her eyes shimmered with tears. They were beautiful tears, perfectly timed, almost too perfect. I realized something important at that moment. This was not a spontaneous celebration. This was a play. A grand illusion carefully stitched together, and everyone here was an actor, everyone except me. I looked at the man again, my supposed grandfather. He did not look at me this time. His gaze drifted across the crowd as if searching for approval. His jaw clenched slightly. Was he nervous? Was he ashamed? Or was he simply obeying a role he had been paid to perform? That was when my heart stopped, not from fear, not from grief, from certainty. My grandfather was dead. And these people were pretending otherwise. My mother continued her speech with perfect grace. She spoke of gratitude and legacy, of lessons learned and sacrifices made. Her voice trembled at all the right moments. People dabbed their eyes with napkins. I stood beside her like a statue carved from disbelief. When she finally placed the microphone down, the man in the wheelchair attempted to clap. His palms touched softly, too softly. My grandfather clapped like thunder, even in old age. He used to say that applause should sound like rain on a tin roof. His claps were never gentle. They were declarations. This one sounded like apology. Guests began lining up to greet him. Some brought gifts, some whispered blessings. I stayed back, watching, studying, measuring every movement of the imposter. He favored his right side when tilting his head. My grandfather always favored the left. He blinked rapidly whenever someone leaned too close, as if fearing discovery. The real Samuel Whittaker had never feared anyone. Not storms, not debts, not even death. My mother called my name again. Esther, come help wheel your grandfather to the dining pavilion. Her tone was sweet, but her eyes were sharp, warning me, commanding me. I walked over with a smile that did not belong to me. My hands gripped the handles of the wheelchair. The man stiffened slightly. I leaned down close to his ear. I will play along. I whispered so quietly no one else could hear. But do not look at me like you know me. He exhaled slowly. Relief or guilt? I could not tell. We moved toward the pavilion. Guests followed in clusters. Some tried to talk to me. I replied politely without listening to a single word. My focus stayed on the man in front of me. As we passed beneath a string of lights, his sleeve slid back slightly. A faded tattoo was visible just above his wrist. A small sun with sharp rays. My grandfather had no tattoos. The man noticed me looking and quickly pulled his sleeve down. I smiled at him, not kindly. The dining pavilion was arranged with long communal tables covered in white and gold. Candles flickered in glass holders. The smell of roasted garlic and lemon butter filled the air. People took their seats eagerly. My mother guided the wheelchair to the head of the main table. She gestured for me to sit beside him. So close, I could hear his breathing. A steady but cautious rhythm. Across the table sat my cousin Lydia. She looked at me, then looked away quickly. Her fingers trembled as she lifted her glass. She avoided my eyes with the desperation of someone hiding a wound. Interesting. To her right sat her brother Caleb. He stared directly at me with something that resembled fear, not annoyance, not resentment. Fear. He knew that I knew. He gave a small shake of his head. A silent plea, a warning, or both. I lifted my glass calmly and drank. The liquid tasted like honey and deceit. The first course was served. Conversations bloomed like flowers under artificial sunlight. Laughter echoed across the pavilion, but beneath the noise another sound emerged. Whispers, not loud enough for most to hear, but I heard them. Sharp fragments slicing through the merriment. Did she notice? She is looking too closely. She was always like her grandfather. We should have told her first. No, she would never understand. Better she finds out later. Later. The word lingered in the air like a stain. Later, as if they planned to reveal something else. Something bigger than this fraudulent performance. I kept eating. Bite after bite, calm, controlled, waiting. Halfway through the main course, my mother leaned toward me. Are you all right? You are quiet. I wiped my lips with the napkin, just observing. She forced a soft laugh. Always the sharp one, you see everything. Yes, I said without smiling. I do. Her fingers tightened around her fork, barely visible. But I noticed. The man beside me cleared his throat. His voice came out rough and uneven. Esther, my dear, it is good to see you again. I turned to him slowly. Is it? He hesitated. Of course, you have grown into a strong woman. Tell me something, I said softly. My grandfather once told me that strength has nothing to do with muscle. Do you remember what he believed it truly meant? The man froze. Come now. I continued with a gentle smile. Surely you recall. He repeated it to me every year on my birthday. The table fell silent. People pretended to keep eating, but every ear turned toward us. Silence stretched. Long, tense. Finally, the man opened his mouth. Courage, wrong, people shifted uneasily, he used to say. I continued, my voice steady but sharp. Strength is not about lifting weights. It is about lifting burdens, yours and others. It is about never pretending to be something you are not. The man in the wheelchair looked down. My mother placed her hand on my arm. Esther, enough, I faced her. Is it? Her lips parted. But before she could speak, Caleb suddenly stood up. His glass shook in his hand. He looked at me with wide, desperate eyes. Not here, he whispered. Please, there it was, confirmation. Whatever was happening was bigger than a mere impersonation. Bigger than inheritance or pride. They were hiding something darker. something they believed I was not ready to face. Fools. I had faced worse than lies dressed as love. I looked at Caleb, then at my mother, then at every face around the table. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Very well, I stood up slowly. Chairs creaked as heads turned. I will not ruin your evening. Relief washed across their faces. Not yet. Confusion replaced relief instantly. I walked away from the table, past the flowers, past the lights, past the fake laughter echoing behind me. The night air felt thick, heavy, charged. I did not look back, but I knew. Every step I took sent tremors through their fragile performance, and somewhere behind me, someone whispered, "She knows." I did not go far, just beyond the glow of the pavilion lights, far enough where their laughter became a muffled echo. I leaned against the stone wall that bordered the garden and let the night rest against my skin. The air smelled of salt from the distant shoreline. A faint breeze brushed past me as if urging me to breathe slower, think clearer. I closed my eyes and listened. Music. Silverware clinking, forced cheerfulness. Beneath it all, footsteps, soft, careful. Someone had followed me. I opened my eyes and looked over my shoulder. Lydia stood a few feet away, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders. Her posture was tense, like a child caught sneaking sweets before dinner. She did not speak. She only stared at me as if waiting for permission to exist. "You came to check if I am going to make a scene," I said calmly. She shook her head quickly. "No, I wanted to see if you were all right." I let the silence linger. She squirmed beneath it. "You are afraid," I said, "not of me, of what I might uncover." Her lips trembled. "Esther, you do not understand. Then educate me." She looked back toward the pavilion before stepping closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Things are more complicated than you think. We did not want to hurt anyone, and yet here we are," I replied. She bit her lip, tears glossing over her eyes. I thought she might break and spill everything right there. But then she inhaled shakily and straightened her shoulders. "I cannot say more, not now. Just please be careful. You are not the only one searching." I narrowed my eyes. "Who else?" She hesitated. Her gaze slid to the shadows beyond me. Then she turned and hurried back toward the lights without another word. "Not the only one searching." The phrase echoed inside my mind like a riddle. Someone else was digging beneath the surface of this charade. Was it an enemy? A stranger, or someone from within? I pushed away from the wall and walked toward the back of the estate, away from the party, away from questions that demanded to be answered in tongues of fire. I needed clarity, distance, a plan. The estate grounds stretched wide beneath the moon. Stone pathways wound through trimmed hedges and clusters of white flowers that glowed faintly in the darkness. I followed the familiar route by memory. Past the fountain shaped like an angel. Past the old willow tree that bent its branches like a curtain, until I stood before the workshop. The wooden shed sat quietly at the edge of the property, its walls dark with age, its windows dim, my grandfather's sanctuary, his cathedral of sawdust and steel. It had once been alive with sound, hammers ringing, blades humming, radio crackling with old country songs. Now it sat in stillness as though mourning. I reached for the door handle. It was locked, of course. I knelt and pulled a thin metal hairpin from my braid. One twist, two. The lock clicked open softly. I slipped inside. The scent hit me instantly. Cedar, varnish, iron. Memories rushed forward like wind through dry leaves. I saw myself as a child standing on a stool while my grandfather guided my hands over sandpaper. I heard him laughing when I accidentally glued my fingers together. I remembered the way he used to whisper secrets as if the wood could hear. "Every piece of furniture has a soul," he once said. "Your job is to listen until it tells you what it wants to be." The room was dusty now, tools hung in silence. The workbench was covered with old rags and scattered nails, but something was off. The vise on the table was slightly loosened. The stool was turned inward instead of out. Someone had been here recently, not a memory, a presence. I examined the floor. One faint trail through the dust, leading to the far corner where a large cabinet stood. I approached carefully, my pulse steady, my steps silent. The cabinet door was ajar. Inside were stacked wooden boxes, each labeled in my grandfather's handwriting. Blueprints, spare parts, polishing oils, but behind them, a small metal case, new out of place. I pulled it out and placed it on the workbench. It had a simple latch. I opened it. Inside were documents, dozens of them, bank statements, property records, medical reports, and at the top, a death certificate. My hands went cold. Name, Samuel Whittaker. Date of death, 2 years ago. Cause, cerebral stroke. Attending signature, I stared at the name written at the bottom. Dr. Helen Carpenter, my mother. The room seemed to tilt. My breath thickened. I read the lines again and again until the letters blurred. The report stated that he was found unresponsive in his bed. Emergency services were not contacted. No attempt at resuscitation was made. Time of death was estimated at 6:45 a.m. Below that, a small handwritten note. He was breathing when I checked on him at 6:20. Unchecked emotions surged like a storm inside my chest. Anger, disbelief, grief sharpening into suspicion. Why did she not call for help? Why did she sign this without alerting anyone else? Why hide it, unless she had something to gain? I closed the case slowly, steadying my breath. Outside, a twig snapped. I turned sharply. Footsteps approached from the darkness. Slow, heavy, someone else knew. I placed the metal box back into the cabinet and stepped away quietly. I grabbed an old hammer from the wall and gripped it behind my back. The footsteps drew nearer. Closer, just beyond the doorway. I did not blink. The door opened, and a shadow walked in. The figure stepped into the workshop without hesitation. No attempt to be quiet. No pause to check the surroundings. That confidence told me two things. Whoever it was had been here before, and they believed they had nothing to fear. The door creaked shut behind them. I remained in the shadows between the shelves, hammer firm in my grip. The light from outside caught the edge of their face. Caleb, he let out a shaky breath and leaned against the workbench, rubbing his hands over his face like someone carrying a weight too heavy for his spine. He did not notice me at first. He stared at the metal cabinet, the exact one I had closed moments earlier. Slowly, he walked to it. He opened the door and reached inside, searching for the same case I had just found, so he knew. He froze when he realized it was missing. I stepped forward, looking for something. He spun around. His eyes widened. He saw the hammer in my hand and instantly raised both arms as if facing a wild animal. "Esther, please, I am not here to hurt you. You came to steal evidence." He swallowed hard. "I came to protect us." That word again, us, as if I was supposed to feel included. I kept my voice low and steady. "How long have you known?" His gaze flickered toward the cabinet. "Long enough." My stomach tightened. "So you knew he was dead, while the rest of you smiled at that actor outside, while you toasted his life." His face twisted with guilt. "I never wanted this. None of us did. Then why did you do it?" "Because," he looked down, "because your mother said it was necessary." The hammer felt heavier. "Continue." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing like a prisoner trapped between walls of truth and loyalty. "When Grandpa died, Aunt Helen said that if we announced it, the company would fall apart. Investors would panic. The board would take control. The estate would be frozen. She said we would lose everything he built. She just wanted to preserve his legacy until we figured it out." I stared at him. "That is not legacy. That is puppetry." He winced. "Maybe, but it was working. Until today." I stepped closer. "What about this?" I opened my free hand, revealing the folded death certificate I had hidden under my sleeve. His shoulders slumped. "You read it." He did not ask. He stated, resigned, like a man watching a fuse burn out. I raised the paper between us. "Your mother found him alive. She did nothing." "Why?" His voice broke. "Because she believed he wanted it." My grip faltered. "What?" He looked at me with haunted eyes. He had been begging to stay home instead of going to the hospital every time he had attacks. He said he was tired. He said if it happened again, he wanted peace. He made her promise. I stood there in silence. The sound of my heartbeat filled the air. Whether it was true or not did not matter. She had made a choice. A choice no one had the right to make. I spoke slowly. "If that is true, why hide it? Why turn his death into a performance?" Caleb exhaled shakily. "Because your mother knew you would not accept it." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. She was right. He took a cautious step forward. "Esther, I know you want answers. I know you want justice. But please, do not burn everything down before you understand the full picture." I lowered the hammer just slightly. "Then give me the full picture." He hesitated. Now, he nodded weakly and leaned against the bench. He looked older suddenly, exhausted, defeated. "The night he died, your mother found him at dawn. He was struggling to breathe." She froze. She said she could hear his voice in her head telling her to let go. She sat beside him until he stopped moving. "Did she cry?" He hesitated. "I think so." "Did she call anyone?" "No." "Did she call me?" "You were overseas. She said she could not bear to tell you." "Coward." The word felt like poison on my tongue. I placed the hammer back on the wall. Caleb watched me carefully, unsure if I was about to scream or collapse. I did neither. I turned toward the workbench and laid the death certificate flat. My fingers traced my mother's signature. Strong, clean, unshaken, even while letting him die. I felt something inside me shift, not break, not heal, transform. I looked at Caleb. "You said I am not the only one searching. Who else?" His expression darkened. "Someone else has been coming here at night. I do not know who, but they leave." Things moved. Tools shifted. Papers disturbed. At first I thought it was Lydia. But she swore it was not her, a third party, watching, waiting. I stepped toward the door, then paused. "Stay away from me," I said quietly. He looked pained. "Esther, not another word." I walked out into the night. The garden lights were still glowing in the distance. Laughter still carried through the air like fog. I did not return to the party. I went to my room instead. Once inside, I locked the door, closed the curtains, and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence was heavy, but for the first time that night, it was mine. I set the document on my lap and whispered to it, "Grandpa, I came home to celebrate your life. Now I will uncover your death." Sleep did not come for me that night. I lay on the edge of the bed with the curtains drawn and the death certificate resting beside me like an unwanted companion. The silence of the room pressed against my ears until it became unbearable. I stood up, walked to the bathroom, and stared at myself in the mirror. My reflection did not look like someone grieving. It looked like someone sharpening. The woman in the glass had eyes that no longer questioned if something was wrong. She already knew. I rinsed my face with cold water and tied my hair back. When I left the bathroom, I no longer felt like a guest in that house. I felt like an intruder in enemy territory. I needed information, real, undeniable information, something beyond whispers and assumptions, something I could not be lied out of. I took my phone and opened the contact list. One name glowed like an anchor: Officer Miles Harper. We had known each other since we were children running through the orchard behind his family's barn. He became a police officer. I became a soldier of a different kind. Our lives drifted apart, but the trust had never frayed. I typed one sentence: "I need access to a death record. Confidential." His reply came less than a minute later. "When and where?" I dialed his number. He answered on the first ring. His voice was calm, low, steady. "Esther," I exhaled. I did not realize until then how tightly I had been holding my breath. "Can you meet me? Name the place." "The old pier, 15 minutes, on my way." He hung up without asking why. That was why I trusted him. I grabbed my jacket and slipped out through the balcony. I climbed down the vine-covered lattice like I had done when I was 16, sneaking out past curfew. The night embraced me like an old ally. The estate grounds were quiet. The party had ended, but the lanterns still glowed across the lawn. I moved quickly across the grass, staying close to the shadows. My footsteps were silent on the stone path. Years of field training made sure of that. When I reached the front gate, I paused. A black sedan was parked beside the driveway, not one I recognized. The engine was off. The windows were tinted, no visible movement inside. Someone was watching the house, or someone was watching me. I kept walking, pretending not to notice. But I memorized the license plate in a single glance. 7 blocks later, I arrived at the pier. The water stretched out in front of me like a sheet of ink. The wooden planks creaked under my feet. The smell of brine and gasoline lingered in the air. The wind tugged at my jacket. Headlights approached from the road. A familiar pickup truck pulled into the gravel lot. The engine shut off. Miles stepped out. He was taller than I remembered, broader. His uniform jacket hugged his frame like armor, but his eyes were exactly the same. Calm, honest, steady. He walked toward me without speaking. I held out the certificate. "I need the full report, autopsy, hospital calls, any dispatch logs from that morning." He took the document and scanned it under the dim light of the pier lamp. His jaw tightened slightly. "Why are you only seeing this now?" I kept my voice even, because they never meant for me to see it. He looked at me for a long moment, then he nodded once. "I will check the system. If there is any missing data, I will know." I hesitated. Then added quietly, "There is more. They hired someone to impersonate him. They held a celebration tonight with an actor sitting in his place." His brows drew together in disbelief. "That is not just illegal. That is, I know." His voice softened. "Esther, are you safe in that house?" "Yes, for now." He studied me carefully. There was no pity in his eyes, only calculation. "Do you want me to intervene?" "Not yet. I need evidence first." He nodded. Then he took a step closer. "You are not alone in this. If things escalate, I will not wait for your permission." I allowed a faint exhale that almost resembled gratitude. He looked toward the dark road behind us. His expression changed. "Were you followed?" "Maybe." He did not question further. He only said one thing: "Then you should not go back the same way." We walked together to his truck. He opened the passenger door. I shook my head. "No, I need them to believe I am still playing along." He hesitated, then reached into his glove compartment and handed me a small metal device. "Press it if you are in danger. I will come." I closed my hand around it. "Cold, solid, real, thank you." He placed a hand on my shoulder. Firm, grounding. "Go." I walked away without looking back. The night swallowed me once more. When I returned to the estate, the black sedan was gone. The lanterns had been turned off. The house loomed in darkness, silent and still like a creature pretending to sleep. I climbed back up to my balcony and slipped into my room. I locked the door. I stood in the silence. For the first time since coming home, I did not feel uncertain. I felt ready. The house was silent when I returned, but silence in that place never felt empty. It felt watchful. A silence made of walls listening and floors holding their breath. I stood in the center of my room for a long moment, my hand closed around the emergency device Miles had given me. A single press and he would come. A single press and this fragile lie my family had built would explode before dawn, but not yet. I was not done gathering tinder. I placed the device under my pillow and moved toward the window. The sky was a deep slate gray, almost morning but not yet. A thin line of orange sat at the horizon like a warning. Soon the house would wake again. I had little time. I pulled my chair to the desk and opened my laptop. I connected to the estate's internal network. My grandfather had cameras installed years ago for security. Most of the family had forgotten they existed, assuming the system was too old to store long-term data. They were wrong. He had shown me once how to access the backups from his workshop. He said every craftsman should know how to protect what he builds. I typed the sequence he had taught me. My fingers did not hesitate. The screen flashed. A directory appeared. Archive. 2 years of footage. Unaltered. They had not known. I began searching the date on the certificate. 2 years back. The morning he was declared dead. I opened the earliest file from dawn. Grainy footage filled the screen. A hallway. Dim. My mother appeared, wearing a robe. She paused outside his door. Her hand gripped the handle, then retreated. She pressed her forehead against the wood. Her shoulders moved as if she were breathing heavily. She stood there for 30 seconds. Then she opened the door. I fast-forwarded. She emerged 20 minutes later. Her face empty, not devastated, not hysterical. Empty. She walked past the camera. There was no panic in her steps, no rush to call for help. She moved like someone following instructions. I watched the timestamp tick forward. Another figure entered the frame. Caleb, younger by shock and innocence. His eyes were swollen as if he had not slept. He stopped my mother in the hall. They spoke words without sound. He looked confused. She held his face between her hands, spoke slowly, calmly. He shook his head. She insisted. He broke. Tears spilled. He covered his mouth to muffle a scream. She did not comfort him. She held him upright, told him to breathe. Then she pointed down the hallway. He obeyed. No one else was called. No ambulance. No doctor, no priest, just silence. I pressed pause and stared at the frozen image of her face, my mother, a woman who had raised me with steady hands and warm tea and constant reminders to be brave. A woman who had taught me that life was sacred and time was fleeting. A woman who had looked me in the eye countless times and said if anything ever happened to me, she would cross oceans to save me. And yet she had let her own father die quietly in the next room without lifting a finger. Grief is loud, but betrayal is quiet. The weight of it settled in my bones. I closed the laptop and stood. I needed to confront her, not to scream or accuse. To look her in the eye and make her answer for the moment she chose an action. But not now, not when my emotions were raw, not when she could twist it into pity or justification. I needed another witness, someone she respected, someone she could not manipulate. My uncle, he was not innocent. He had participated in the charade, but he had not signed the certificate. He had not been in that hallway. He might not know the full truth. He needed to. I grabbed my jacket and unlocked my door quietly. The hallway outside was dim, lit by pale sconces that cast long shadows. My mother's room was down the corridor to the left. My uncle's room was on the right wing. I moved silently. The floor creaked once but not enough to echo. I passed family portraits lining the wall. My grandfather's face looked down from a dozen frames. Smiling, proud, alive, I stopped outside my uncle's door and listened. No sound. I knocked softly. A rustle. Then a voice, groggy. Who is it? Esther. Silence. Then the door opened a crack. His eyes were wide awake behind the tiredness. What happened? I pushed the door open and walked past him. He followed me, confused. You knew he was dead, I said quietly. He closed the door. His shoulders sank. Yes, but you did not know how he died. He stared at me. Unease crept across his face. I took the certificate from my jacket and placed it on his dresser. Read the signature. He hesitated, then picked it up. His eyes scanned the paper, then stopped. His hand trembled. He looked at me as if I had shattered something inside him. She signed this. Yes, she found him alive. I continued, and did nothing. His voice cracked. That cannot be true. It is. He sank onto the edge of the bed, his hand still clutching the paper. We cannot let her face this alone, he whispered. I stared at him. I am not here to protect her, I said. He looked up, startled. But she is yours, she made her choice. He swallowed hard. His eyes glistened. What are you going to do? My voice was calm. Make her tell the truth. His jaw clenched. Do you want me there? I nodded once. Tomorrow morning. He stood. I saw the conflict in his face. Love and guilt and duty crashing into one another. Esther, yes, do not hate her completely. She has been carrying something we do not understand. I met his eyes. Then she will explain it. He nodded slowly. I turned to leave. As I reached for the door handle, he spoke again. Esther, I stopped. Whatever happens next, I am with you. I did not respond, but I let the silence serve as acknowledgement. I stepped back into the hallway. The house was still quiet, but the silence was no longer watchful. It was waiting. Morning came without beauty. No golden light, no birdsong, no warmth. Only a pale gray spread over the horizon like a sheet laid across a body. I stood by the window of my room and watched the sky change with the patience of someone counting down to detonation. Today was the day the lies would speak out loud. I dressed simply. Dark jeans, black sweater, no jewelry, nothing that could be mistaken for softness. I tied my hair back tightly. My hands were steady. My heartbeat was not. At 7 sharp, I left my room. The corridor was silent. My footsteps echoed softly against the polished floor as I moved toward the eastern wing where my mother's suite was located. Halfway there, my uncle stepped out of his room. He looked pale but composed. Our eyes met. No words were needed. He fell into step beside me. We reached her door. My hand stopped inches from the handle. She was already awake. I could hear movement inside, a drawer opening, something being zipped shut. Packing. She was planning to leave. Not today. I knocked once. The sounds paused, then resumed. Faster. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. My mother stood beside an open suitcase on the bed, neatly folding a blouse. She did not look surprised to see me. She did not look startled. She looked prepared. Good morning, Esther. Her voice was calm. I was just leaving. I finished. She held my gaze, her posture straightened, graceful, regal. Even now she refused to look cornered. I am needed at the clinic. There is a patient, no. Her eyes narrowed at my tone. Excuse me, you are not going anywhere. She set the blouse down slowly. Ethan, she said, turning to my uncle. Tell her this is not the way. He stepped forward. Helen, do not run, she scoffed. Run, from my own daughter. I walked further inside. My voice was quiet. From the truth, her jaw tightened. She looked between us. Then she folded her arms across her chest. What truth? I took the certificate from my pocket and placed it on the bed. This one, her eyes flickered to the paper, just for a moment, but I saw it, the flash of recognition, the tightening of breath, the faint tremor beneath control. She did not pick it up. She did not deny it. She only said, I will not discuss this. You will. She looked at me then with an expression I had seen only once before, when I told her I was leaving home to enlist despite her objections. The look of a queen facing rebellion. You think you are ready to judge me, she said softly. I did not respond. I let silence be the answer. She stepped closer until we were face to face. Her voice dropped. Do you know what it is like to watch a man you love beg for death? Do you know what it is like to be the only one who hears him because everyone else pretends he is strong enough to survive forever? I held her stare. Do you know what it is like to watch your child leave again and again, every time wondering if she will come back in a casket? For a moment, emotion cracked her composure, just a flicker. Then she swallowed it. He asked me to let him go. She whispered. Then you should have told me, I said. She shook her head. You were not ready. I stepped back. My voice sharpened. You did not get to decide what I was ready for. She flinched. Uncle Ethan moved forward gently. Helen, you could have called me. She turned sharply. You would have tried to stop me. Maybe, but I would not have let you carry it alone. She stood silent. Her eyes glistened for the first time. I took a slow breath. We cannot change what happened, but we can stop lying about it. She straightened. And what would you have me do? Tell the truth. To who? The family? The community? The police? Yes. She laughed bitterly. And destroy everything your grandfather built. No, I said firmly. You already did that when you turned his death into theater. Her eyes hardened. Before another word could pass between us, footsteps echoed from the hallway. 3 heavy knocks struck the doorframe. We turned. Officer Miles Harper stood there, not in uniform, but carrying authority all the same. My mother stiffened. Ethan inhaled sharply. Miles looked at me. I nodded once. He stepped inside. Dr. Carpenter. He said calmly, we need to talk. Her expression froze. This is a private matter, not anymore. She lifted her chin. And who gave you the right to intrude? I did, I said quietly. She looked at me with disbelief, then betrayal. You called him. No, I corrected. I showed him what you hid. Miles stepped forward, placing a folded document on the dresser. There is a discrepancy in your father's medical file. The coroner's submission was never logged with the state. Legally, his death is unconfirmed. Her face paled. Until that is resolved, he continued, the case must be reopened. Silence. Then she laughed, not out of humor, not out of madness, out of disbelief. You all think you know what justice is, she whispered. She looked at me. You want truth? Fine. She walked to the bed, picked up the certificate, and held it to her chest. His last words were not peaceful, they were angry. He begged for more time, then he begged for less. He cursed God, he cursed himself. He begged me not to leave. Her voice wavered. I did not leave, but I did not call for help either. She looked at me. Now tell me, what is that? Murder, mercy, or madness? No one answered, because none of us could. She sank onto the edge of the bed. For the first time since childhood, she looked small to me. Miles stepped back respectfully. He whispered to me. She confessed. My throat tightened, not from victory, from grief. I turned away because I could not bear her eyes. Because in that moment, I did not know if I hated her or pitied her. I left the room before the weight of her confession could bury me. The hallway felt longer than I remembered, stretching ahead like a tunnel with no end, the light at the far end too faint to promise escape. The floor beneath my feet was cold, smooth, merciless. I moved without looking anywhere in particular, but I could feel the house watching me, the walls storing echoes of every lie that had been spoken beneath this roof. They had heard her admission, and they would not let me forget it. My feet carried me downstairs into the main hall. What had been a celebration space hours before now looked like a battlefield abandoned after a false victory. Petals crushed beneath careless shoes, napkins left twisted like torn white flags, champagne stains glistening faintly on the marble as if the house itself had bled joy and could not clean it fast enough. The silence was unbearable. Not because it was quiet, but because it rang with the memory of laughter that no longer had a place here. Sunlight crept through the tall windows in thin slivers, slicing across the mess like judgment. I stood in the middle of it all, arms limp at my sides, mind split between rage and sorrow. If someone had walked in at that moment, they would not have known whether to comfort me or fear me. I did not know either. I drifted toward one of the long tables that still held empty plates and half-eaten desserts. A fork rested on a slice of cake as if someone had been about to take another bite before realizing all appetite had been fake. I picked it up, stared at it, then placed it down again. Even the silverware felt like evidence of delusion. A sound came from the staircase. Soft, tentative. I turned and saw Lydia descending, her hair unbrushed, eyes puffy from crying. She paused when she saw me, gripping the railing as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. For a moment, neither of us moved. She opened her mouth like she might say something, then closed it again. Perhaps she realized that words were useless in a house built on lies. I did not offer any either. We passed one another like ghosts in the same tomb, acknowledging existence but too ashamed to speak of the burial. I walked out through the glass doors into the garden. The air outside was cooler, gentler, but it did nothing to soothe me. The stage still stood with its perfect arrangement of chairs, untouched as if awaiting another performance. It was almost comical. The world had shifted entirely, and yet everything remained where it was placed yesterday. The lie had cracked, but no one had moved to clean the pieces. I kept walking until I reached the willow tree by the lake. It had always been my refuge, even before I understood what refuge meant. The branches hung low, offering shelter from the world with the same quiet dignity they always had. I stepped beneath them and let the leaves brush my shoulders like old hands greeting an old friend. The ground was damp, but I sat anyway. I pulled my knees to my chest and rested my chin upon them. The lake beyond was still, glass-like, reflecting the pale sky in a perfect mirror. I stared at it and imagined how easy it would be to let time stop here, to pretend I was just a girl again waiting for my grandfather to call me in for breakfast. But the past had lost its softness. Every memory now carried new weight. Even the tender ones had been stained. I thought of my mother. Not the woman in that room confessing to silence, but the woman who used to braid my hair before school, humming old tunes while I fidgeted impatiently. I remembered how she would put a note in my lunchbox every morning, handwritten in small cursive letters that always said the same thing: be kind, be brave, be mine. I wondered when she stopped living by her own words, or if she ever had. The wind picked up slightly, stirring the lake and distorting my reflection on its surface. It looked unfamiliar, like a stranger wearing my face. I stared at it and tried to determine who I was now. A daughter, a judge, a witness, a threat, a savior. None of it felt correct. None of it felt whole. I heard footsteps behind me, slow, light. I did not turn. I knew without looking that it was my uncle. He stopped a short distance away, giving me space. He remained silent for a long while. I was grateful. I did not have room in my chest for anyone else's grief yet. Eventually, he spoke, his voice quiet. It was never meant to go this far. I did not answer. He did not try again. After a few moments, he sat beside me, leaving a respectful distance. We stared at the lake together without speaking. It was probably the first time in years we shared silence without awkwardness. He clasped his hands and rested them on his knees, the posture of a man who had run out of excuses. She loved him, he said softly, in her own way. I let the words hang in the air. They drifted like dust, then settled uselessly at our feet. Love was not an absolution. I stood up slowly. He looked at me. What will you do? He asked. Tell the truth, I replied. He nodded as if he had expected nothing else. The sun climbed higher, casting longer rays across the lake. I turned back toward the house. The willow leaves brushed my shoulders one last time, as if reluctant to release me. Inside, the house would already be shifting, whispers turning into arguments, guilt turning into defense. My mother would be calculating her next move, whether in tears or resolve I could not predict. Officer Harper would be waiting for my decision. The law would soon step in. My family would fracture under the weight of exposure, but all of that would come later. For now, I walked toward the house with my steps slow and deliberate. I was no longer shaking, no longer unsure. I had passed the point of return. By the time I reached the back doors, I knew exactly what today would be. The day they lost control of the story, and the day I claimed it. At the time I re-entered the house, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. What had been quiet tension earlier had transformed into restless movement. Doors opened and shut upstairs. Voices murmured behind walls. The calm after the confession had given way to panic beneath polished surfaces. It was no longer a house. It was a nest of secrets scrambling for cover. I walked through the main hall with steady steps, no longer trying to blend into the silence. Whoever heard me would know I was not hiding. I had no reason to. The burden of shame no longer belonged to me. I headed toward my grandfather's study. It had been locked since the day I arrived. My mother claimed it was being preserved as a memorial, but I knew now it was sealed for protection, not reverence. His files, his journals, his will, everything that mattered was either inside that room or locked in the hands of people who had lost the right to hold them. The door was heavy oak with a brass handle worn smooth from decades of use. I tried it locked, of course. I took a step back, braced my shoulder, and slammed into it. The wood groaned but held. I hit it again, harder. A third time and the frame cracked. On the fourth, it swung open with a burst of dust and stale air. The scent inside hit me immediately, a lingering blend of cedar, tobacco, and machine oil. His scent, familiar enough to make my chest ache. The room was preserved exactly as I remembered it. Shelves lined with books of carpentry and engineering. Tools polished and displayed like trophies. His desk at the center, worn at the edges from years of leaning. There were blueprints laid out beneath a glass cover, unfinished designs waiting for hands that would never return. I approached the desk. In the top drawer, beneath a stack of envelopes, I found it. A sealed file marked in his handwriting, to be opened only by Esther. No hesitation. I broke the seal. Inside were several documents, legal drafts, bank transfers. A notarized amendment to his will. At the top of the stack, a letter. My name written across the envelope in ink faded slightly with age, but still clear. My hand stilled. For a moment I could not bring myself to open it. It felt too sacred for the chaos around me, but the world was already burning. Sacred things could not stay sealed forever. I unfolded the letter. If you are reading this, it means I trusted correctly. His voice echoed in my mind as I read. I knew the day would come when you would be the only one willing to carry truth without bending it. Your mother is not a bad woman, but she is afraid of endings. Your uncle is not corrupt, but he is loyal to comfort more than righteousness. They will choose preservation over justice, even when justice is the only thing worth preserving. You will not. My throat tightened. You were born with iron in your spine, child. You tried to hide it for years, thinking it made you difficult. It did not. It made you mine. I had to pause. The letters on the page blurred briefly before I blinked them back into clarity. When they fight you, and they will, do not let anger be your weapon. It burns too quickly. Use resolve. It lasts longer. If you must bring the world down to build something better, do it with steady hands. And when they ask why you did it, tell them it was not revenge. It was restoration. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my jacket. The other documents went into my bag. Evidence. Proof, fuel, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Rapid, Uneven, I turned as my mother appeared at the doorway. She froze when she saw the open drawer, the broken seal, the papers in my hands. Her expression flickered between fury and fear. "You had no right," she said. I stood tall, calm, unshaken. "I have every right," I replied. She inhaled sharply as if preparing for battle. "What do you plan to do with that?" I did not raise my voice. Exactly what he intended. For a moment, she looked at me like she did not recognize who I was. Then her shoulders sank. She stepped into the room slowly, as if entering a church. "This will destroy us," she whispered. "Then you should have lived differently," I said. Her eyes glistened, but she did not cry this time. She only looked at the desk, at the space where he once sat, and for the first time, I saw her not as the orchestrator of lies, but as a widow who had spent 2 years pretending her grief was dignity. But understanding did not erase consequence. "I will give you 1 day," I said, "to prepare." She looked at me sharply. "For what?" "For the truth to go public." Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. I walked past her and left the room. The weight of the documents in my bag felt solid. Grounding. Today was the day I became more than a witness. I was now the executor of his final wish, and I would see it through, even if the house had to burn around me. The entire house seemed to sense the shift in me as I walked down the corridor with my bag. There was no longer hesitation in my step, no uncertainty in my hands. I was not hiding anymore, and that made them afraid. Even the silence recoiled, as if realizing it could no longer contain me. I descended the staircase and entered the dining hall. Most of the family had gathered, not for breakfast but for strategy. The long table was empty, yet they lingered around it like generals without a plan. My uncle stood near the far end, tense but composed. Lydia hovered by the window, eyes red, arms tightly wrapped around herself. Caleb paced near the doorway, muttering under his breath. They all fell silent when they saw me. No one spoke. They didn't need to. I could feel their panic without sound. They were not afraid of the lie anymore. They were afraid of the person who now held it in her hand, ready to throw it into the open. I did not stop walking until I stood at the head of the table. No declaration, no announcement. I simply set my bag on the polished wood and placed the documents from my grandfather's study on top of it. The sound of paper meeting the surface was louder than any shouted accusation. They stared at it as though expecting it to bite. Lydia was the first to move. She took one slow step forward. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to speak, but the words never formed. Her gaze shifted from the papers to my face, searching for mercy. I did not offer any, not yet. Caleb leaned forward slightly, jaw clenched, torn between defiance and desperation. He looked like a man preparing to bargain with a judge before a sentence was spoken. My uncle, in contrast, stood still, shoulders squared, accepting what was to come. He had made peace with consequence. The others had not. I opened the folder and spread the pages carefully, displaying them like a dealer revealing cards, bank statements, transfer records, a notarized will addendum, and the letter from my grandfather folded neatly beside them. The truth was no longer hidden. It was public. Still, I said nothing. Let silence do the talking. It was my mother who finally entered. She appeared at the doorway in a fresh blouse, hair perfectly arranged, face steady. She looked as though she was preparing to walk into a courtroom and argue her case. But the moment she saw the papers laid out for all to see, something in her expression faltered, just slightly, like a crack appearing beneath polished marble. She approached slowly. Her gaze traveled over the documents, pausing on the letter, then shifting to my face. What she saw there must have confirmed what she already feared. I was not reconsidering. I was not softening. I had chosen my path. She glanced at the others, her family, her accomplices, her witnesses. They looked at her not as their anchor anymore, but as the reason they were now adrift. She straightened, drawing breath into her lungs as if preparing to take control again. But control had already shifted hands. I closed the folder. "I will be meeting with legal counsel this afternoon." The words came calmly. No raised voice, no heated tone, just statement. Cold, final. Lydia flinched. Caleb opened his mouth, but my uncle stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder to stop him from speaking. My mother did not move. She simply stared at me, studying my face. Perhaps she was searching for softness, perhaps trying to gauge whether there was still time to sway me. She found neither. "I will not fight you publicly," she said at last. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the exhaustion beneath it. "But I will not assist you either." "That is acceptable," I replied. "Your cooperation is not required." Her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in resignation. She gave the smallest nod, then stepped back, as if acknowledging defeat in a duel neither of us wished to admit had been won. I gathered the papers and placed them back into my bag. As I fastened the zipper, I knew the moment I walked out that door, I would no longer be seen as daughter, niece, cousin. I would be plaintiff, executioner, historian of truth, so be it. The sun coming through the tall windows cast a long line of light across the floor, leading straight to the front doors. Without another word, I followed it. The first step was not triumph. It was liberation. But liberation always came at cost, and I was ready to pay it. I left the house not as a daughter but as something entirely different, an agent of consequence, carrying proof instead of memory. The morning air was crisp as I stepped outside, colder than before, as if the world itself was reminding me that clarity was never comfortable. Sunlight stretched across the long driveway, guiding me forward like a silent escort. Gravel crunched beneath my shoes in a steady rhythm. Each sound felt like a verdict. At the bottom of the steps, Officer Harper was waiting beside his truck. He was no longer in plain clothes. His badge was clipped to his belt. His presence made clear that we were no longer playing within the boundaries of family. This was now a matter of law. He looked at my face and said nothing. That was the thing about people who knew how to read silence. They did not fill it unnecessarily. He simply opened the passenger door. I got in without speaking. As the estate disappeared behind us, I stared out the window, watching the long fence that bordered the property stretch endlessly like a spine of white bones. The world outside was honest. It did not pretend. It did not smile when it meant to conceal. Every tree was a tree. Every road was a road. Sometimes I wondered why people insisted on twisting themselves into masks when the earth beneath them stayed so sincere. The police station in Belford was small, a converted brick library with only 6 offices and a single holding room. We entered through the side door to avoid attention. Miles led me into an empty conference room. A plain table. 2 chairs. A coffee maker faintly crackling in the corner. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical. Exactly the opposite of my family's grand stage. I placed my bag on the table and laid out the documents one by one. He scanned them silently, occasionally pausing to photograph a page. I watched his expression carefully. There was no shock, no disgust, only calculation. That somehow was a comfort. Emotion would have cheapened the moment. Logic gave it weight. "This will move fast," he said. "Once I make the report official, it can't be contained. The press might pick it up. The board of trustees, the foundation council." "I know." He looked at me steadily. "Are you ready for the collateral damage?" "I already accepted it." He nodded once. There was a long pause, not awkward, just full. Then he spoke again, softer. "You do understand that this won't end neatly. Some people will see you as brave, others as cruel. Your mother will not be arrested immediately. There will be hearings, appeals, maybe public sympathy. Some will defend her, some will hate her. And they'll place you in opposition to her even if you don't want that." I folded the letter from my grandfather and placed it carefully back inside my jacket. "I am not here to win favor," I said. "I am here to tell the truth." He held my gaze for a moment, then nodded as if that were enough. We spent the next hour going through procedures, statements, signatures, recorded summaries. The motion of justice was not glamorous. It was paperwork and patience. It was waiting for the system to adjust its gears around one piece of newly revealed truth. It was slow. But it was moving. When everything was filed, he closed his folder and exhaled. "That's it," he said. "It's out of our hands now." The room felt heavier, not with doubt, with permanence. I stood, gathered my things, and walked toward the door. My hand was on the handle when Miles spoke one last time. "Whatever happens next, don't let them rewrite the story." I gave the smallest nod. On the drive back, I asked him to drop me at the edge of the town instead of taking me directly home. I needed distance before stepping into that house again. He didn't protest. I walked the rest of the way on foot. Belford was quiet that morning. Storefronts had just begun lifting their gates. The bakery on Willow Street was already letting out the smell of cinnamon and butter. A man hosed down the sidewalk in front of the florist shop. Children rode past on bicycles, shouting about some trivial adventure. Real life went on, untouched by the storm brewing in my world. There was a sobering comfort in that. My story was loud to me, but to the world it was just another ripple. Justice, pain, betrayal, none of it made the sun rise any differently. When I reached the estate gate, I stood before it for a long moment. The building was still, but I could feel the unrest inside like heat radiating from behind stone. They would know soon, if not already. I pushed the gate open. There was no turning back. The house was quiet when I stepped inside, but it was not the calm silence of peace. It was the hush of anticipation, like an audience waiting for the curtain to rise on a final act. The air felt thicker than before, as though words had been spoken in this space while I was gone, words that carried weight and consequence. No footsteps approached to greet me. No questions were asked. They were waiting, not for answers, those were already in motion. They were waiting to see what I would do next. I moved through the foyer toward the main hall. Halfway there, I heard movement from the sitting room. I stopped, not because I hesitated, but because I recognized the sound. A glass being set down, a chair shifting slightly, my mother. I turned toward the doorway. She sat on the velvet chaise near the window, hands folded in her lap, posture composed yet unmistakably strained. Her appearance was immaculate, as always, but the exhaustion beneath the surface betrayed her. She had not slept. Not since the confession, not since I walked out with the truth in my hands. She did not look at me when I entered. She kept her gaze on the window, where sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, casting pale shadows across her face. "You went to the police," she said quietly. It was not a question. I remained standing. "Yes." She nodded, her eyes still fixed outside. "How far will you take it?" "As far as it needs to go." She drew in a slow breath, and for a moment I thought she might lash out, beg, argue, bargain, anything other than sit in acceptance. But she did none of those things. Instead, she lifted her chin and finally turned her gaze toward me. Her eyes were sharp, not pleading, but searching. "Do you believe I deserve punishment?" I did not answer immediately. That was not a question meant for impulse. "I believe," I said slowly, "that what happened must exist in truth. Whatever follows is not mine to dictate. It's for the law, the world, your own conscience." A faint smile appeared on her lips, not joyful, not mocking. It was the expression of someone who had expected condemnation and found restraint instead. "You speak like your grandfather," she whispered. "Measured, controlled. He used to speak that way too, before the illness took it from him." Her eyes drifted upward, unfocused now, as though she was seeing him in the space between us. "He wanted dignity," she murmured. "But I don't know if I gave him that. Perhaps I stole it from him instead." Her hand trembled slightly as she clasped her wrist to still it. "For 2 years, I convinced myself I did the merciful thing, that I spared him humiliation, that I ended his suffering." She paused. "But I didn't do it for him." She looked at me then, and her voice broke, not in sound, but in honesty. "I did it because I could not bear to watch him fade." Her composure cracked like glass struck by a stone. She held the pieces together, but only barely. "You see me as a monster," she whispered. "Perhaps I am, but know this, Esther, I have punished myself every day since that moment, not because I ended his life, but because I never asked you to understand." Silence followed, heavy, human. I walked further into the room and stood near the opposite end of the chaise, close enough to hear her breathing, far enough to keep the boundary that truth demanded. "I don't hate you," I said. She closed her eyes as though bracing for impact. "But I cannot protect you from what comes next." Her eyes opened. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she did not wipe it away. It was the first tear I had seen from her since I was a child. "I don't want protection," she whispered. "I want permission." "Permission for what?" She inhaled shakily. "To grieve him, properly, without pretending, without ceremony." Her voice turned fragile, like wind moving through old paper. "I want to stand at his grave and speak the truth to him, not to the world." I stood there, feeling the gravity of her words settle inside me. She was not asking me to erase what she had done. She was asking not to be erased herself. That was not forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. I gave a single nod, not approval, not absolution, just a silent allowance. She exhaled deeply, as though she had been holding her breath for 2 years. We stayed like that for a while. 2 women bound by blood, separated by choice, connected by grief. No shouting, no triumph, no reconciliation. Just a calm understanding that honesty would shape what remained between us, however fractured it might be. When I finally turned to leave, she did not call after me. She let me go, not out of surrender, but out of respect. In the hallway, I paused briefly and looked back. She had not moved. She remained seated, staring toward the light. For the first time, she looked like someone ready to face consequence not as an adversary, but as a widow. And I was no longer just her daughter. I was my grandfather's legacy made flesh. The world did not explode in a single blast. It cracked slowly, like ice thawing beneath weight, one fracture at a time. By the next morning, the first ripple had reached beyond the estate. It began as a rumor. A quiet inquiry from a hospital board member who had been contacted by the local authorities. A formal request for verification of my grandfather's cause of death. A private notice sent to the legal department of the Carpenter Foundation. None of it public yet, just murmurs, just tremors, but tremors precede quakes. At breakfast, no one touched their plates. The food looked beautiful, untouched, like it belonged in a painting rather than reality. My uncle stirred his coffee without drinking it. Lydia picked at her napkin until it began to tear. Caleb didn't even sit down, he paced behind his chair like a caged animal. My mother did not speak. She sat with her hands clasped like she was attending court before judgment was read. No one tried to pretend anymore. I finished my meal in silence, not because I was hungry, but because I refused to let performance dictate my behavior. When I stood to leave, all eyes followed me, but no one dared to call me back. Outside, my phone buzzed with the first official notification. Subject: inquiry regarding late Dr. Warren Carpenter, immediate review required. There it was. Paperwork now had a voice. I ignored the urge to respond. Instead, I walked straight toward the garage and found my grandfather's old car, a 1967 black Continental he had spent years restoring. It had been sitting untouched since his death, too sentimental to sell, too sacred to drive. I opened the door. The leather creaked, releasing the faint scent of polish and dusted wood. I sat behind the wheel and rested my hands on it. For a long moment, I didn't start the engine. I simply breathed. This was not nostalgia. This was inheritance. When I finally turned the key, the engine roared to life with startling strength, as if eager to be useful again. I pulled out onto the long road leading away from the estate, not toward town, not toward the legal offices, toward the cemetery. It was quiet when I arrived. No visitors, no groundskeepers. Just rows of stones standing like sentinels guarding stories no one fully knew. I walked to his grave with deliberate steps, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots marking every inch of my resolve. I stood before the simple headstone bearing his name. Dr. Warren Allen Carpenter, beloved father, innovator, humanitarian. The inscription felt less like tribute and more like restraint. It left out more than it included. How many people knew him beyond titles? How many saw him when no one else was watching? How many loved him honestly, not for his legacy but for his laughter, his stubbornness, his quiet decency? I knelt, not to pray, to speak. You were right, I said softly. They were never going to survive the truth. A gust of wind shifted through the trees behind me, bending the branches like a nod. I don't know if what I'm doing is justice, I continued. Maybe it's correction, maybe it's reckoning, maybe it's something else entirely. But I know you would not have wanted your life to end as a myth. A pause. I will not let them turn it into theater again. The leaves rustled like applause, or warning, I could not tell. Footsteps approached quietly behind me. I did not turn. My mother stopped a few paces away. I knew it was her by the way she inhaled, measured, deliberate, as though calibrating emotion. She did not speak. She stood beside me but kept her distance, as if respecting both his memory and my claim over this moment. We remained that way for a long time, two figures divided by guilt and devotion, bound by the same grief. Finally, she whispered, barely audible, "When the trial begins, I will not deny it." I closed my eyes, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but cooperation. It was enough. I stood slowly and dusted the gravel from my coat. "We can rebuild what's left," I said. She looked at me. "Can we?" "We can try," I replied. "But not on lies." She nodded once. No embrace, no apology. No tears, just shared understanding beneath open sky. As we walked back toward the car, I realized something. The scandal would not define us. Our response to it would. And for the first time since this began, I felt not like a survivor of chaos, but the architect of what would come after it. The storm finally broke 3 days later. Not with thunder, not with courtroom drama, just a headline. It appeared first on a small online journal dedicated to local investigations. A quiet publication most people wouldn't normally read, but quiet doesn't mean weak. Quiet is strategic. Quiet is patient. And on that morning, quiet became explosive. Questions raised over death of esteemed philanthropist Dr. Warren Carpenter, family under review. No accusations, no sensationalism, just the right amount of smoke to make people look for fire. Within hours, it spread. Larger outlets picked it up. Regional channels followed. By afternoon, my grandfather's name was trending, not for his achievements, but for suspicion. Talk shows dusted off old clips of him giving charity speeches, now analyzing his every gesture as if his blinking pattern might confess something. Armchair experts materialized overnight. Some called for a fair investigation. Others called it an attack on a respected legacy. No one knew the full truth yet, but everyone acted like they did, and all of them wanted a face to attach to the story. Unfortunately for them, I didn't offer one. I stayed silent, not because I was hiding, because I was waiting. In chaos, the loudest person is rarely the most powerful. The one who speaks last is. Inside the estate, the atmosphere had curdled from anxious to volatile. The phone rang constantly. Some relatives pretended to defend the family in public while whispering blame in private. A few tried to contact me, not to ask how I was feeling, but to ask whether I could clarify the situation in a way that did damage the brand. The brand. As if my grandfather's life was a product, as if truth needed marketing. I ignored them all. I spent most of my time in the study reviewing the documents again and again, preparing, not for a fight, fights are emotional. I was preparing for presentation. Truth, when delivered cleanly, does not need to shout. It just needs to stand. My uncle visited occasionally. He brought coffee and stood in the doorway without pushing conversation. Sometimes he would glance at the old blueprints on the walls and whisper things like he spent a month perfecting that hinge design, as if reciting prayers. He was grieving openly now in the only way he knew how, through memory. Lydia stayed in her room. I heard her crying once, late at night, not the soft kind, the heaving, broken kind that leaves someone voiceless after, but she didn't approach me. Maybe she was ashamed. Maybe she was afraid I would look at her differently. Truth is, I already did, but not with hatred. I understood now, guilt wears different masks. Mine was resolve, hers was silence. The only one who still moved like a hawk in a storm was Caleb. He paced the halls like a man waiting for an ambush. He made phone calls behind closed doors. He insisted we needed legal control of the narrative. He used words like strategy and containment. He couldn't understand that the narrative was no longer ours to spin. It belonged to the truth now. By evening, news vans appeared at the gates. Reporters camped at the edge of the driveway, shouting questions at passing cars. Some drones even flew above the property until security chased them off. They kept asking for a statement. I gave them none. Not yet. That night, I stood alone on the balcony overlooking the estate. The sky was clear, but the world below was flickering with noise. Headlines. Opinions, speculation. Some called my mother a murderer, some called her a martyr. Some called me a traitor. Not one of them knew us. I leaned on the railing and let the cold air settle over me. Soon they would know the truth. In my voice, not theirs, not leaked, not twisted, delivered when I was ready. Behind me, footsteps approached. Light, measured, my mother. I didn't turn. She came to stand beside me, her gaze fixed on the horizon. They're going to ask for a press statement, she said quietly. I know. Will you speak? Yes, she nodded, no protest, no plea, no attempt to shape what I would say. Do you want to review it with me before? No, I replied calmly. She accepted that. After a long silence, she spoke again, even softer. When you speak, will you mention me? I turned my head slightly. Yes, she exhaled, steady but faint. Then say it plainly. I held her gaze. Without defending me, without attacking me. Just truth, I nodded. She returned the gesture. We stood there like that until the sun dipped below the trees, not adversaries, not allies, witnesses, waiting for judgment. The world around me grew louder with each passing hour, but inside I felt strangely still. The chaos outside my door no longer dictated my movements. I had already stepped beyond the point where noise could control me. The day after the news broke, the estate held an unplanned gathering, not by invitation, but by gravity. Members of the family drifted toward the great room one by one, not to discuss strategy this time, but simply because no one could bear to be alone. There were no speeches, no official statements, no illusion of unity. Just bodies existing in proximity, each carrying their own private reckoning. I did not sit with them. I stood by the window, watching the clouds roll across the afternoon sky. Soft, slow, indifferent. Nature never cared for human scandal. Maybe that was why it brought me comfort. It did not perform. It simply continued. I heard footsteps behind me. My uncle approached, quiet as always. He stood beside me without speaking. After a while, he said, "The board contacted me this morning. They want to remove your mother from her position." I nodded. He hesitated. "They asked if you would be willing to take her place." I turned to look at him. His expression was unreadable, not manipulating, not encouraging. Just presenting reality. I considered the offer only long enough to understand it, then I shook my head. I didn't expose the truth to inherit power. He gave a faint breath of what might have been relief. "I told them you'd say that." He returned to the others. I stayed at the window. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time had become slow water, moving without urgency. Eventually, my mother entered the room. Conversations died down instantly. She was not dressed in authority today. No sharp blazer, no immaculate jewelry, just a plain gray sweater and quiet resolve. She did not look defeated. She looked emptied. She did not ask for attention. She simply walked to the piano in the corner, an instrument that had been silent for months, and lifted the fallboard. No one dared move as she sat and placed her hands on the keys. The first note rang through the room like a confession more powerful than words. It was a lullaby, the one she used to hum while brushing my hair as a child. The melody wavered at first, then steadied. As it filled the space, heads bowed, shoulders trembled, even the chandeliers seemed to flicker softer. She did not cry while she played, but I did, not loudly, not visibly, just a single tear trailing down my cheek, carrying years of questions with it. I did not forgive her in that moment, but I understood her. When the final note faded, she closed the piano gently and stood. Her eyes met mine across the room. There were no apologies spoken. None needed. We had already given each other what words could not. I stepped toward the doorway. Before leaving, I looked back one last time at the house that had raised me, broken me, and now released me. The people inside were no longer the rulers of my story. They were simply characters within it. Outside, the sky was clearing. Not perfectly, clouds still hung heavy in places, but light was cutting through. I walked toward it without hesitation, not as a daughter seeking justice, not as a heroine claiming victory, simply as a woman who refused to live in a lie. And that, I realized, was enough.